As Tim said, my name is Rendi Scholten, and I am on staff here at Orchard. And we are in week 2 of this series, The Way of Kneeling. And really, the series is in the midst of all the hustle and bustle and all the stuff that we all have going on. What does it look like to kneel before the Father? And not literally, but metaphorically, what does that look like for each of us? But before we get into that, do you ever walk into a space or, even wake up in the morning and you're just, you're overwhelmed and you're just saying, wow, I am overwhelmed. And I have to confess, that's how I feel this morning. I am feeling just overwhelmed. And we can all feel that way, right? With all this stuff at any given moment, at any given day. Here's the reality of my life. I'm a wife. I'm married to this amazing man that I'm crazy about, Jesse. And I'm a mom of 4 awesome humans, ages 13 to 36. And so we run a rat race most days. And we as a family, like many of you, we're overly busy. And me personally, I'm extremely unfocused and extremely distracted right now. Maybe you feel this. We have all the things, just like you. We have sports, we have school, we have activities, and right now we have all the concerts, and we have lessons and jobs, yard work, house upkeep. You guys get this. And with all that, Jesse and I are trying to figure out how do we get date nights in, and then some healthy time for ourselves. Do you feel that sometimes? Do you feel that pull? And then you add in this extra layer of things. So we already have all these activities, but then you add in this extra layer of things that take up more space in our lives. Maybe it's broken relationships, it's grief, it could be pain, it could be hurts, expectations of others, or maybe expectations of ourselves. And maybe it's dealing with anxiety, depression, and other emotional challenges. And then there's this faith journey that we're all on. And so we have all this stuff here that's taking up space, and then we have this relationship with Christ. How in the world do I fit this in, grow in my relationship with Jesus to be transformed in a way that maybe, just maybe, can bring some peace to this? And how does this shift so this is carrying the weight of everything that's overwhelming me? It's a big question, right? Do I even believe that it's possible? And you know what? I actually do, and here's why. Because this morning, I'm not overwhelmed with all of these things. They exist, don't get me wrong, they really never go away. They're always there. It's just this morning I'm overwhelmed with this. I'm overwhelmed with this joy and this knowledge and this understanding of how big and how vast our God is. And if I would just kneel before him, he can take all of this and he can carry it for me. He can handle all of this because he's that big. So whatever is overwhelming us, whatever we're carrying that is weighing us down, give it to him. He is big enough to carry it all. And so what does it look like? What does it look like to kneel before the Father? This way of kneeling and doing so before a God that is so big, it is almost impossible to comprehend. And as I've been working through this way of kneeling, what I've rediscovered or I've been reminded is just how big God really is and how small I am. I'm not insignificant, I'm just small. He's the author and he is the creator of this story, and we are all just characters in that story. And so this morning, we're going to talk about the vastness of God, how big God is and how small we really are in this cosmos that he created. And no, we're not going to get all sciencey this morning, although that would bring me an immense amount of joy because I am a math and science nerd. But let's start here. What is the first image that pops into your head when you think about how big and how vast God is. Think about it for a second, and what's that first picture that you see? And maybe these are some of them. Maybe it's a solar system. Or maybe it's the Northern Lights, because those were pretty awesome the other night. I thought that was fun to experience. Maybe it's the beach. Maybe this is where you just feel some peace and some solitude. Maybe it's a storm that you feel just how big and how powerful God is when you get to witness a storm. Maybe it's a sunset. I get to watch a lot of these. This is actually in my backyard. They never get old. I'm in awe of how amazing God is every time I watch one. Or maybe it's this. Maybe it's mountains. And for me, personally, when I think of the very nature of God and the vastness of God, this is the first image in my head. I am in awe, and I am in wonder, and I am even overwhelmed with who he is. You see, at the top of these mountains, these very mountains, I have had some of my holiest moments. I cannot be there and not recognize the vastness of God, which makes it even more overwhelming for me. I have sat in his presence, and I have knelt before him on those peaks in some of my and some of my lowest moments, along with some of my greatest joys. It is mind-blowing that there is no created place or thing devoid of his presence, myself included. And Psalm 139 actually celebrates this glorious truth. In fact, it's a praise and a prayer from David to the God who knows all and is everywhere. So listen to this. He says, Lord, you have examined my heart and know everything about me. You know when I sit down or stand up. You know my thoughts even when I'm far away. You see me when I travel and when I rest at home. You know everything I do. You know what I'm going to say even before I say it, Lord. You go before me and follow me. You place your hand of blessing on my head. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me, too great for me to understand. At first read, I have to tell you, this actually terrifies me. He knows my every thought. Like, no one should ever know everything that's happening up here. No, they just shouldn't. And I can't be the only one. I'm certain that I'm not, that just went, ugh, yikes. Like I know. Husbands, maybe you're like my husband, and you've said this before. My husband's like, babe, I can't read your mind. I wish I could, but I can't. And guys, I promise you don't. You don't want to know what we're thinking all the time. It would actually terrify you. It really would. And darn, God knows what I'm going to say before I say it. And that just makes me shake my head, because why? Like, why would he just not stop me sometimes? I mean, dude, if you could stop that from coming out of my mouth, that would be super helpful right now. But that's not how it works, is it, right? We have this active role that we have to play, and boy, do we get it wrong sometimes. And I did this, full confession here, I did this so poorly last weekend. I've shared before that I have a kid who races go-karts, and so one thing you may not know about me is that I am ultra competitive. And last weekend, we went racing up north to a track that my son he's actually really good at this track. He's won a number of times. And so we go in, and my expectations, they're way up here. And Friday night did not go as I expected. And friends, I said all the words. Every single thought came out. And I knew in the moment, I should be quiet, but I wasn't. I knew I should not say any words, but I did. I said all of them, and I was not living as a follower of Jesus. And why didn't God stop me? I mean, it would have been so helpful for me, for my husband, and for my son. God knew what I was going to say before I said it. And here's the overwhelming thing. God already knows we're going to make a mess. He knows everything about us, despite how we fall short. He still loves us, and he still accepts us. He's right here with us through every situation, every success, every failure, every emotion, challenge, struggle, and celebration. And David knew that this great big God cared enough to search and to know the heart and mind of every man and every woman. It is not just that God created everything. He created me. It is not just that God knows everything. He knows me. And it's not just that God is everywhere. He is everywhere with me. David actually found peace and joy in knowing that God knew him better than he even knew himself. God knew the smallest aspects of David's everyday life just as he does ours. And I think that's why it's overwhelming for me. It's hard to understand that a God that created the solar systems, the storms, and the mountains that I love cares so deeply about small old me. And this is a wonderful and humble place to be. And I do actually take deep comfort in knowing this. Knowing that God is all-seeing, he is all-knowing, he is all-powerful and present everywhere. And you don't get to go to any of those places that I showed you. You don't have to go to those places to feel his presence and to kneel before him. No matter how high, no matter how low, no matter how far you go, God is present and God is active. And David shares this exact thing as we continue in Psalm 139. He says, I can never escape from your spirit. I can never get away from your presence. If I go up to heaven, you are there. If I go down to the grave, you are there. If I ride the wings of the morning, if I dwell by the farthest oceans, even there your hand will guide me, and your strength will support me. God is so big and he's so vast that he is omnipresent. He is present everywhere. He is with us everywhere, protecting, loving, guiding. And we are invited to kneel before him and to sit in his presence. You see, when we come humbly before God, fully understanding his power and his greatness and his presence, we can then fully accept his abiding love for us. And that love is what transforms us into what he intended for us, for our life, and for our purpose, all according to his story, the story that he authored. So what would happen? What would happen if we surrendered? Dave talked about this, last week. What would happen if we gave up control? We handed over the control, the fear, the anxiety, whatever it is that you're carrying, we gave it all to God. And then we just turned our hands over. And we trusted, and we were open to receiving what he has written for us in his story. Open to receiving his love for us, his greatness, his power, and his will for our lives. Because he is so great, he is so big, he is so vast. And there's nothing he cannot do. Nothing he cannot work out. Absolutely nothing. If we are willing to quiet the noise and kneel in his presence and just hand it over to him. So let me ask you this. How big is your God? Maybe. That's okay. Is he big enough for your problems? Is he big enough for your pain? Is he big enough for your fears? Is he big enough for whatever you're facing? Is he big enough for your future? If he isn't, then maybe you need to trade him in for the God of the Bible. Because the God I know, and the God I love, and the God I follow, and the God I kneel before can handle whatever you throw his way. And he will not run away. Despite how small you might feel, you are significant in his story. And I have seen this God heal relationships, reconcile marriages, conquer addictions, fight cancer, and carry many of you even through deep, deep losses. This same big God is the one who knows your every thought, your speech, your joy, your sorrow, your pain, your celebrations. We are not so small that he doesn't care about us. He cares deeply about all this, and he's big enough to handle it. He's big enough to handle it all. And personally, in our life, we've had to walk through some of these very challenges that we mentioned, and we have witnessed how big God is, despite at times how small we felt. I shared that our oldest is 26, and we had some very, very hard years and challenges that we never saw coming. And to be fully honest, 2 of those years were brutal. So brutal that I quit praying, I quit talking to God. For almost 2 years, I was so hurt, I was sad, and I was angry with how things were. I felt so small and insignificant and felt completely abandoned by God. And my prayers before I stopped altogether were, God, why don't you hear me and do something? God, why are you not working in her life? And God, do you simply not care? And I'm certain there were many more than that, you get what I mean, but here's the thing. God was working in it all. I just wasn't paying attention. We eventually had to, have the courage, make some really hard decisions and get her out of Cedar Falls. And that first night, we moved her to Des Moines with her dad. Jesse and I came home. We got in bed. And for the first time in almost 2 years, I humbly came before God, and I prayed and I cried. And I cried because what he did was so very big. It was hard and it was still not fixed, but I was deeply thankful because the first time in 2 years, we knew where our daughter was and that she was sleeping somewhere safe and she was clean with people who loved her and cared about her. And that relationship is still an enormous work in progress, and we do have setbacks, but golly, God is so big, and he could take something so hard, and he gives us little victories along the way, if we are willing to kneel before him and just hand it all over. He can have it all. If we would just kneel before him, I believe our God is so big that he can take the most painful losses and give us our biggest wins. So how do we do this? What does it look like? How do we quiet the noise and kneel before our big, big God? Here's what David did. He went to God in prayer, and this is how he finishes the psalm. He says, "Search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting." David came to God, the God of perfect knowledge and perfect presence, knowing that he was a God of love, and he could be trusted to search him and to know him on the deepest levels. He knelt before the Father, and he asked him to search him, to know him, to test him, and to lead him. And I think this is a really risky prayer. When David asked God to search him, he was asking God to examine his deepest thoughts and perhaps reveal his innermost motives and actions, which then David had to face, and he actually had to get to know, and he had to examine his own heart, and he had work to do. David not only asked God to search and know his heart, but then he said, "God, test me and reveal my anxious thoughts. God, reveal to me my worry, my distrust, and my disbelief." And David keeps going, asking God to see if there are any offensive ways in him. In other words, God, what are my blind spots? The things leading me away from you, away from kneeling before you, leading me away from this story that you authored for me. How well do we do this? How well do you allow God to search you, to know you, to test you and lead you? How well do you make time to sit and kneel before God? And it's okay. It really is okay to say you don't make time and you don't even know what that means. Because quite frankly, I don't always practice this well either. And clearly, as you saw in the challenges with my children, I'm working on it. I'm a work in progress. And so here's my invitation, and I genuinely and authentically want to invite you on this journey with me. And here's what I want you to think about doing. I want you to start carving out some time in your day. And that amount of time is going to look different every day. Just know that. It's whatever time and space you have. Find a space, and first, like David, sit in prayer, inviting God to examine your heart and to know you and to know all your anxious thoughts. And then ask him to test you and to lead you into a time of kneeling. And I challenge you to literally do this. Surrender it. Give it all to him. Open your hands, just like Dave's done before, and give it to him. And he wants to put on, and then just be open to receiving what he wants to put on your heart, what he wants you to be aware of in that time of kneeling. And in this time, here's where it gets a little tricky. And so I've been doing this. There's only one rule, okay? So in this time, after you've, prayed, surrendered, I want you to listen for 20 unique sounds. When I first shared this with someone, they laughed at me and they said, maybe you should just start with 10. They're probably right. Like, it's okay to just start with 10, but start with 20. Your goal's 20. And I stole this idea from another pastor, so full disclosure, but you're looking for 20 unique sounds, okay? So here's the deal. If you hear a car, great, off the table you heard a car. If you hear a bug buzzing, done, that's your sound too. And so then your time is up when you hear 20 unique sounds. And I encourage you to stick with it day after day. This pastor says, oh, it's really easy. I gotta tell you, I think it's really hard. Here's what I found for me personally. I wanted to fabricate and control what I heard. I had to focus and refocus my thoughts because they tended to wander. I had to have patience. And so this is my current spiritual practice of quieting the noise so I can sit in his presence and hear him. Because the whole point of this exercise is to hear him. And through this, I'm learning just how big he really is in new and different and glorious ways. And not what I see, but what I hear. And how he is really speaking to me. And not in an audible, I know, sort of weird way that you might be thinking, but just sitting in his presence, in his power, this way of kneeling. In this time, I've been reminded that no matter what is happening in my daily life, in the rat race that we live, no matter how things look or how I might feel surrounded by my anxious thoughts, my wrong words I've said, my doubts or my fears. He is a God of mercy, a God of grace, a God of forgiveness. And I'm inviting God to examine my heart and to know it at this deepest, most intimate level. And I'm prayerfully asking him to test me and to lead me. He wants me to give it all to him because he knows he can handle it. So whatever it is for you, it's my hope that you'll try this, and through this practice, you can hold out your hands and just say, God, I give it all to you. And I'm here, hands open, to receive your deep, abiding love for me. All right, let's pray. In Psalm 95, it says, for the Lord is a great God, a great King above all gods. He holds in his hands the depths of the earth and the mightiest mountains. The sea belongs to him, for he made it. His hands formed the dry land too. Come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker. And so, God, this is our invitation to a way of kneeling before you, our author, our maker, our sustainer of life, who breathed us into existence out of nothing. To kneel before you in surrender and submission without fear, fully trusting that you will use us for your glory because you are that big. And God, we pray this in your Son's name. Amen.